On behalf of Lloyd and Ben and all of us at Looker, welcome. Thanks for taking a couple of days out of your schedule to geek out on data with us, and hopefully we'll make this interesting. So what I wanted to do, though, was talk a little bit about the data and analytics marketplace, take a step back. And we've talked a lot about the idea of data democracy or data-driven or data culture, all these buzzwords. But I think in a lot of ways, we've yet to deliver on the value. There's been a lot of hype. There's been a lot of talk. But I would say when you go into the typical organization, even I'd say you're probably among the most data-oriented companies in the world. It's still hard to find the real value, at least that's living up to the hype. But I think we're on the verge of something interesting. There's a lot of trends coming together right now that may make kind of another big step happen. And I wanted to kind of take a step back and see what brought us to this point. And I think by understanding that, we can start to understand where we can go. So maybe going back a while, 7, 10 years ago, kind of the end of the first wave of BI, of business intelligence and analytics. And I would say this was the era of the Cognos and MicroStrategy and Business Objects, sort of those first tools that were really, complete systems. They were big monolithic stacks, but they were complete systems. And when you had a question, or you wanted to close the quarter, or you wanted to do tax, you'd ask that question, and you'd get something that was 100% accurate, usually. I mean, pretty close to accurate. Because it was important, and there was a lot of stuff and consulting and things like that went into those systems. And they grew around the idea that the database was not built for analytics. It was built for transactions, it was built for updating things, deleting records, but not really for scanning, not really for analytics and doing those kinds of workloads. So the whole stack and the whole idea of analytics grew up around the case that the database was expensive. It's not a hit against the Oracles of the world, but it was just a different kind of world back then. You were paying CPU licenses, you didn't want to overload those systems. And as those kind of neared the end of their life, or at least what we thought was the end of their life, something interesting happened. And I know it's breakfast. If anyone has any food, I apologize now, because the story I'm going to go next is, Daniel didn't want me to give it, but I'm going to give it anyway. Does anybody remember this video? This video was around, it surfaced around this time. It was one of the first viral videos on the web, 500 million views. Anyway, this whale died, and it washed up on the beach in Oregon. And nobody knew what to do with it. So they called, who else? The Department of Transportation. And they said, well, what should we do with it? I don't know. And they decided they would blow it up. So they got 1/2 ton of explosives, and they loaded it in the thing. And this is before camera phones and stuff. So they invited the local news crews. And they actually did some PR around it. And they invited people to have picnics. And it was a rare sunny day in Oregon, because it's never sunny there. And what happened next was uncontrolled. And it's the reason there were 500 million views, and it was the first viral video. Because when they exploded this whale, it was a mess. Giant pieces flew up into the air, and rather than little pieces that the birds were going to clean up, giant pieces flew into the air. 100-pound pieces flew hundreds of yards away. The news crew is ducking for cover. The people are running. Everybody's getting covered in pieces of this whale. It's just disgusting. And at the end, the whale is still kind of sitting there. So they didn't destroy it. It's still kind of sitting there. And I would argue that's kind of what happened in BI and analytics at the end of the first wave. So as those monolithic systems sort of evolved and reached the end of what we thought was their life, the tech vendors, us, me, we blew it up. Oh, we don't need that anymore. Blow it up. Bam, and all these pieces come flying out that we're dealing with today. And I would say the second wave of BI continued to evolve around largely the idea that the database was still kind of slow. But it became self-service. Push it to the edge. Give it to the departments, right? Everybody wants a self-service tool. And then we realized, well, to do self-service visualization, I need data prep. And to do data prep, well, then I got to have wrangling in front of that. And then I have to have all these other things. And what happened was the logic of the business, the way that we describe our metrics, who a customer is, how much revenue, all those kind of things, kind of drifted off into SQL files on people's desktops. or MapReduce files or different things, right? And suddenly, the whole logic of the organization was hidden. It was just like it went underground or something. And these pieces, you know, some of them were great. I mean, there's great products in there, but they weren't complete anymore. And they didn't really fit together that well. And I would argue, like the video, in the end, the whale was still there, right? Because you still, in a lot of places, had to have your big system to close the quarter and do those kinds of things. So now we had kind of these two waves living at the same time in a lot of organizations. And that was a mess, and it is a mess. And I think that's where we are now. It's kind of in this second wave. And I would argue the business users are suffering. The data analysts are suffering. A lot of people are suffering. And when we go out and talk to customers, or when I meet with you all, I almost always hear one of two problems. The first is the idea of data breadlines. So when I want data as a person who needs to feed their self-service tool or whatever, I go to the data team and I say, I have this question, give me 1 million rows of data, I'm going to put in this thing, do some analysis, great. I'm doing self-service. And then I go back and I kind of play with this thing. I'm like, no, that wasn't right. I got to go back. And I go back, and when I turn the corner to the data team's office, there's a line of people. Because what's happened is these tools that we have to feed them. We get hungry. We want data. We've got a taste of it, and we want more, right? So we've just whet everybody's appetite. And this line gets longer and longer and longer. And often we hear the data team just like, oh, the queue of people is so long. You know, I just can't service everybody's requests. And this is an impediment to being data-driven, right? Because these people, the business users, have 100 questions, 75 questions, and they're going to stand in line like 3 times. Beyond that, then they just give up, right? But they're probably not going to starve. I mean, in some, they'll just go back to like ill-informed opinions, I guess, but they're probably going to go try and do something else. And I would say what happens next is they go find whatever data they can find, right? They use last month's data. They use like stuff that who knows where it came from. They're like putting it together from these systems that, Bob over the next cube, all this stuff, right? They're putting it together. And not only do we not know where this stuff came from, we don't know how it was explained or modeled. Like we're talking about like, how many total active customers are there? I don't know. We all calculated it different. How many do we have? We'll often go into an organization. I don't know, Dan's around somewhere, but we have this term data brawls we used to talk about. It's where people get together in these rooms and they're talking about these core metrics and they realize what they thought they were agreeing on, it's like different languages. They're just talking, it's Tower of Babel, right? How many total active users? 10,000. No, 11,472. No, 28,000. Well, we've all defined it differently, right? And this is kind of a mess. So I would argue in this world of data democracy, the democracy we've created isn't so much like Thomas Jefferson, Hamilton, the Greeks. It's more like Twitter and CNN and Facebook. It's kind of where we are today, where there's a lot of ill-informed opinion and people thinking they're right? So it's a problem, and we have a bit of a mess. But I think there's hope. There's some promise out there. And while this was all being fought out, while these tools were evolving, the analytics marketplace was evolving and BI was evolving, it was evolving around this concept that the database was slow. But suddenly, there was a total revolution in data infrastructure. There was this nonsense we called big data. That was kind of the space I came from before looking. And big data was hype. But at the end of the day, what it gave us that was very, very real was fast, cheap databases. It started with the big MPP databases, the Verticas and Greenplums and Netezas and stuff like that. And then it became Hadoop-oriented systems. I'm not even talking about specific technologies, but it was the Sparks and Prestos and stuff like that. And then it just got really easy to deploy. It went up into the cloud, with Snowflake and Google BigQuery and Amazon Redshift. Really changed the game because this thing that we were evolving around as tool vendors was ripped out. There was a revolution, and this other thing happened. So we had evolution of tools, revolution underneath. And I think we're just now starting to see how the worlds come together. And I would argue we're on the third wave of analytics and BI now. Sort of that second wave is coming to a bit of a close, and there's a third wave. And I think the third wave will be the dawn of something really interesting. It'll finally be this point where we can deliver on the promise of being data-driven, of driving data culture, these weird words that I never thought I would say, but I'm saying now because I'm seeing you do it, right? It's this idea that I can put data into the hands of people, the users in the business who understand the business, and they can make better decisions, right? And they can just come up with their own questions and ask and answer their own questions. And I think the reason that this can start to happen in this new data platform world is we are greatly simplifying the data supply chain. From the point that we see data coming out of some tables in Salesforce and Marketo and Zendesk and out of our applications and out of NetSuite and all these things, right? To the point where I can put that in front of business users is getting much faster. We're collecting, all this detailed data into these things we call data lakes, or what the hell we call them, just these big, cheap things that we can ask questions of. And the data platform now can really consolidate a lot of the pieces that we had to stitch together in the second wave. The idea of how do we integrate the data? How do we explain it? How do we model it? How do we govern it? How do we create a single source of truth? How do we visualize it? How do we present it to users so that they can share it? How do we integrate it into other systems, right? So as we sort of really simplify this data supply chain, what you can do on top is very interesting because it's not about just creating another monolithic stack. That's not what it's about right now, and I don't think the third wave is going to be about that. It's going to be finally modernizing analytics, where it's like other kinds of web applications. It's like, the way that the world has started to work now in technology, except for a lot of the BI tools. And what we'll do with it is interesting because, clearly the, quote, BI tool on top, the visualization tool or whatever you want to call it that the end users use is important. Like, that will continue to be important. But I think more and more, this data platform will be used to do other things. Why is everything I do as a data consumer a dashboard? Like, I have a hammer, and I have this hammer, and I'm hammering everything with a hammer, right? Sometimes I need a screwdriver. Sometimes I need a scalpel. Right? I don't just, my interface, my user experience to the world may not be a dashboard. And what we can start to do is wrap and mold the data around business processes so that if I'm a account manager looking after customers, I may have a place where I work that's telling me, well, here's the customers who are in trouble, here's the stuff that's coming up for renewal. It's all data from other systems. It's really data applications or meta applications, and you're seeing a lot of these kinds of applications pop up as point solutions. So it's really this idea of taking data out of traditional BI tools and putting it and wrapping it around business processes so that our constituents will actually use the data. Like, why do they go to the BI tool? The BI tool is like this third thing. They should be operating in the thing where they work today. So I really think this third wave is finally the technology that brings together a lot of big themes, a lot of big things that have been happening in the industry, and will finally start to be impactful to business users. And at Looker, that's what we're trying to do. So this is what we've been trying to do. Lloyd, from the day he started the company, it was really this notion of to be not just a viz tool. The companies like Tableau were already way ahead of us. That was not what we were ever building. It was really to build a platform that did a lot of these things in one new world. So really build a platform, right? But not for the old world, not for that thing that was evolving. We wanted to build a thing for the new world of data. So to build a platform for the new world of data, but then not just to do the same old stuff. I think to really unleash and unlock data that's trapped away in systems so that we can actually become more data-oriented in the business, more data-driven, if you want to use that word, to build data culture. That's really what we've been trying to build at Looker. And what's interesting, we don't come up with a lot of ideas ourselves, I suppose. It comes from you. It's what we see you do. Right? So we went around over the last couple of months and we talked to a lot of you, and we actually put it on video. And it was interesting what you all came up with. So let's just take a quick break. We're going to look at a video of sort of what you all are doing with data.